an abbreviated class for you today, for an abbreviated population. So microbiology, we're talking about microbial diseases of the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system. Cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system both are involved in the transport of nutrients, blood cells, white blood cells for the lymphatic system to fight infection, red blood cells primarily for the cardiovascular system to be able to carry nutrients, oxygen, and other constituents that's required for the body to function. White blood cells defend against infection. The lymphatics transport interstitial fluid to the blood system. This interstitial fluid contains cells that fight infections such as macrophages and lymphocytes. This is just an illustration from your textbook demonstrating the cardiovascular system. I know the majority of you have had anatomy. Certainly the people in AMP2 are familiar with the cardiovascular system and circulatory components. But just remember, in this system, primarily what we're talking about is deoxygenated blood, blood that's been used by organ systems, returns back to the heart, and then the heart and the lungs in combination are responsible for oxygenating blood and sending that oxygen supply, along with other nutrients such as glucose and other electrolytes that's required by the tissue. The heart is responsible for pumping that blood out to the remainder of the system. In the blood are those red blood cells and other fluid constituents that we talked about. The lymphatic system works as a circulatory system as well, a little more independent, but wherever we see blood vessels at, arteries and veins, typically there are lymphatic vessels there as well, because the two systems support each other. This is just an illustration demonstrating the lymphatic systems. Again, primary role is to carry the cells that fight infection or fight invaders from our body. A couple of terms that you need to be familiar with, one of which sepsis. This is bacteria that's growing in the blood, sepsis. Severe sepsis can cause a systemic response. The systemic response that I'm referring to, increased heart rate, fever, dilatation of blood vessels. When blood vessels dilate, think about blood vessels in a water pipe. Got so much pressure, if you make the blood vessel bigger, pressure drops. Well, if the pressure drops in our body, that means we don't get blood supply to the brain, we don't get blood supply to the kidneys. That's not a good thing. Kidneys don't get blood supply. Kidneys are supposed to get 25% of our cardiac output. They don't get blood supply, they shut down, they don't work. If our brain doesn't get blood supply, it shuts down, it doesn't work, and so it leads the consequences of severe sepsis, this marked hypotension, this marked systemic effect from infection in our system can cause life-threatening situations. Septic shock, low blood pressure cannot be controlled. In these instances, the person requires aggressive, even in severe sepsis, the person requires not only aggressive antibiotic therapy to be able to fight the infection, but the person also may require a tremendous amount of fluid volume. The fluid volume that's being infused into the person is to try to fill up these dilated blood vessels. Because if you don't get the pressure up, you won't get blood supply to the kidneys and to the brain. The person may require vasopressors, medicines that try to constrict these blood vessels, may require antipyretic medications, medicines to fight fever, and so a combination of aggressive therapies. The patient may even require advanced life support, cardiac life support from septic shock. Gram-negative sepsis is typically the worst type of sepsis, mainly because gram-negative organisms secrete endotoxins. This causes blood pressure to drop. Antibiotics can worsen the condition by killing bacteria, and this is how. If you kill the bacteria, the endotoxins are inside the bacteria. Kill the bacteria, they lyse, their cell membrane breaks open, and then more toxins flows into the bloodstream. In some cases, individuals that have significant bacterial loads, you treat the person with antibiotic therapy to get rid of the bacteria, and you end up with septic shock because you treated the bacterial infection. So you're kind of in a catch-22 situation. If you don't knock out the bacteria will secrete the toxins, but if you kill the bacteria too aggressively, the toxins will also be released and cause the problem. Now again, the bacteria is the problem. However, the chemical that it releases causes the signs and symptoms that lead to significant problems, so just bear those two in mind. Some gram-negative sepsis that can occur, nosocomial infections related to hospital-acquired or clinical settings where infections develop. These nosocomial infections, Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pyogenes, Group B strep, and then Enterococcus fecum and Enterococcus fecalis. Puerperal sepsis basically refers to childbirth fever, which can occur to mothers. Streptococcus pyogenes is the organism that infects there. It's transmitted to the mother during childbirth by the attending physician or midwives. Huge issue back in the day when physicians went from birthing room without washing hands, without providing aseptic technique or antiseptic solutions for cleaning. And so it was a huge disease back in the day. Endocarditis is another type of bacterial infection that you may have heard of or may be familiar with. This is inflammation in the endocardium of the heart. I think Rondé Barber had this a couple of years ago, had a bout of endocarditis, took him out of several games. Inflammation in the lining of the heart can be somewhat of a painful condition. Again, because it's inflammation, it causes soreness, so you can have chest pain associated with it. Subacute bacterial endocarditis caused from alpha hemolytic streptococcus from the mouth, and acute bacterial endocarditis can occur usually involving Staphylococcus aureus, and pericarditis usually involving strep as well. These are heart valves, and the heart valves have vegetations on them. Vegetations are basically a combination of fibrin and platelets that kind of coagulate together and stick on the heart valve and can disrupt the heart valves. Now, a couple of processes that can occur here. Not only do the valves not close completely, and you know what happens, well, those of you in AMP2 recognize what happens if the heart valves don't close completely. When the heart pumps blood out into the system, the valves close to prevent the blood from flowing back into the heart. When the heart pumps and it pushes blood into the lungs, the valves close to keep that blood in the lungs, and so it doesn't fall back into the chambers of the heart. Well, if the valves have vegetations on them, they can't close completely. They're not smoothly shaped surfaces that fit side to side. So these abnormalities in the surface allow blood to regurgitate back into the system. The other thing that can happen, these are pieces of debris. And so what can happen, these little pieces of debris can break off. And they break off and they can travel and embolize and go to another part of the body and shut off circulation. The big blood vessel like the aorta, no problem. The blood clot can go right through that. But when you get to the small blood vessels, such as the pulmonary arteries or pulmonary capillaries, these little pieces of vegetation can block off the pulmonary capillaries and cause a pulmonary embolism, and part of the lung tissue will die. It can break off and travel out of the left ventricle, can travel through the carotid arteries to the circular willis, into the brain, out into the left middle cerebral artery, and block off that artery as it begins to taper off and cause a stroke. So these vegetations, not only do they block off blood supply and can lead to infarction and or strokes or necrotic tissue, but they also have infectious organisms in them as well. And so now you have these satellite lesions of infection that will also begin to grow. So vegetations can occur, again, based upon the types of infections in their location. Now, rheumatic fever, this is inflammation associated with heart valves, an autoimmune process, which is a complication of strep pyogenes. Now, what is the autoimmune process? Bacteria causes the infection. Our immune system attacks that bacterial invader, that antigen. Okay, that's the first step. That's a normal process, and that's what should occur. However, the second step in that is when that bacteria goes to the heart valve, or goes to the kidney, or goes to the thyroid gland, or goes to any other organ tissue, and our immune system attempts to attack this bacteria. Bacteria has this amazing ability to be able to mimic our own tissue. And so as our antibodies are trying to attack this antigen, the bacteria, it decides, okay, I'm going to change a little bit, and I'm going to start to look like the person's own tissue. Our immune system responds to that. Our immune system's pretty smart too, and so it says, oh, no, you're going to change, but I'm going to change too, and I'm going to keep attacking you. The unfortunate part of that is because it looks like our own tissue, our immune system begins to attack our own system and causes an autoimmune type of a response. So now our immune system is making antibodies, yes, against the bacteria, but also against our own tissue as well, destroying our tissue, causing this autoimmune response. This can cause diffuse inflammation. Glomerulonephritis is a condition that we'll see. Get strep in your throat, strep releases from your throat, gets in your blood system, gets filtered out in the kidneys, lodges in the kidneys. The immune system begins to attack the strep that's in the kidneys, but unfortunately will also attack our normal tissue as well. There's another process as well, I'm not sure if it's discussed in this presentation, where our antibodies will actually attach to the antigen, the bacteria, and they form these little complexes, antigen-antibody complex. We talked about that when we talked about the immune system. Now you have what was a small particle, the antibody, and another small particle, which was the antigen, but together they make a bigger particle. And so that big particle is circulating through our system, and it gets hung up in the small, tiny blood vessels as well. You have these antigen-antibody complexes that basically just gum up the works. And they cause a localized inflammatory response. The immune system tries to help that out more, and it can lead to an autoimmune response as well. So rheumatic fever is just an example of that. Well, I'm sorry, and what the picture was illustrating to you there are these rheumatic nodules, where basically an inflammatory process has become walled off in a particular joint. In rheumatoid arthritis, it occurs in joint areas. You see significant swelling, inflammation, and then a hardening of these inflammatory processes. And all of the nodules don't have to be painful. Some will swell, inflame, and then will scar down, and they don't cause pain. But unfortunately, because they're in a joint area, eventually enough nodules interferes with your ability to be able to carry out activities and or functions based upon the nodules there. Another infectious disease, gram-negative rods, is called tularemia. This is spread or transmitted by rabbits. You see it a lot in hunters. Deer and deer flies also carry the organism. It reproduces in phagocytes. Phagocytes are typically the cells that are going to destroy invading organisms, but as you can see, this bacteria will reproduce in the phagocytes, which leads to major problems. This is one of the locations several of the locations in the United States where you might see these outbreaks occur. Brucellosis, or brucella, another organism that can affect the lymphatic system. Undulant fever is another name for it. Gram-negative rods, they grow in phagocytes as well. As you can see, the organism can get in elks, bison, and cows and lead to miscarriages or aborted fetuses in these animals. Brucella abortus is the name. Also can exist in swines, goats, sheep, and camels. Undulant fever spikes at about 40 degrees Celsius each evening, so high temperatures, 101, 102 degrees, transmitted via milk of the infected animals. When I went on a research project in Saudi Arabia. This was back in 2002, before the Gulf War had started. Of course, while we were over there, the Gulf War started, and we're in the middle of Saudi Arabia. And so, you know, you're trying to be nice to everybody because you didn't want, you know, anything bad to happen. But we would go to these households, and one way to get to meet the families, you know, you only got to hang out with the men. You didn't get to see or visit women or anything like that because it's a very restricted country. But one of the ways to bond with the men there was to sit outside at a camp, and everybody had this outside area where you sit in the desert, and they would bring the camels in, and they'd milk the camels, and you'd have to drink this camel milk, and you had to drink it because you didn't want to offend anybody, and everybody drank out of the same bowl. And so they milked the camel, and they're milking the camel right in front of you. And I can't drink warm milk. I just got to tell you stuff, but especially this milk. And they milk the camel, and whatever's on the camel's belly is falling in the milk and stuff, and they're milking the camel. And it foams up on the top. It foams up on the top. And I was working with this doctor from Lebanon, and but he could speak Arabic. I couldn't speak Arabic, so I had to stick with him because we know what was going on. But he would just sit there while they were milking the camel, and he'd sit there next to me going, "We're going to get brucellosis. We're just going to get brucellosis." And he kept saying it, and he'd smile, and he'd say something in Arabic, and he'd lean back over to me, "We're going to get brucellosis." And they'd pass this bowl around, and to drink the milk, you had to get the foam on your face. I mean, that was just a part of it. So you'd have to big silver bowl, and you drink it down. And I didn't get brucellosis, thank goodness, but I want to tell you, I was scared because it's especially there in the camels, brucellosis is rampant because they don't culture the milk. It's not sent through pasteurization or anything like that. Now, they do have pasteurized milk, but not for the camel milk, which is supposed to make the men virile and strong and all that good stuff. Yeah, right. But anyway, another big organism, anthrax. Anthrax also can invade the lymphatic system. Anthrax you may be familiar with. It's one of the organisms, those of you who come to the conference this weekend will learn a little bit more about anthrax. Anthracus, gram-positive organism, endospore-forming organism, aerobic rods found in soil. Cattle routinely are vaccinated for it. Treated with ciprofloxacin and doxycycline. Cutaneous anthrax, endospores can enter through a minor cut. 20% mortality rate. As you know, it can also infect the lungs. It also can infect the gastrointestinal system as well. This is a cutaneous presentation of anthrax, but again, can also be in the gastrointestinal system. You can inhale it